Okay, thanks everybody for joining us. This is we are now officially, this is also the first recording. We are the Manufacturing Compliance Committee now, no more MOC, so MCC. And this is May 18th, and this is the May meeting. Just to start us off, we also have a new name and a new member. John Richardson is joining us as the newest committee member. John, if you'd like to say hi and introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into our agenda.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Richardson. Most of my background has been in RF engineering and sort of IT network related things. So in my day job, I run an ISP here in the UK, and yeah, I'm looking to help out on the committee for anything I can in terms of my expertise and experience, and pretty level-headed and good moral barometer, I guess.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks,
I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just to jump into our discussions, the first thing that we have is we've discussed the topic of deposits for 5G hotspots. This is specifically for manufacturers that are already in the network. They've already been approved. That was kind of what was discussed on Discord. So just to kind of everybody kind of weigh in here for this. Also, if this is something that's going to be allowed, it should be discussed how much of a deposit is allowed, at what stage we're going to allow the deposit. Somebody want to jump in there? Thoughts,
on the
questions, concerns?
Sure, I'll start like on the kind of small business side, or on the business, whatever business side is. I think it's totally fine to allow deposits for some of these things, because it's a big commitment on the side of manufacturers to produce them, and so there's a giant step between someone saying like, oh yeah, I'll totally buy that, and then actually putting their payment details in. So I think we got to support that in some way. Now, to what extent, I don't know, but
let me ask a question, which is explaining the scenario, I guess. Sure. The reason we are trying to find a way to allow for deposits is because we usually deny deposits until the unit is approved, right? And yep. The issue here is we don't really have an audit process for 5G, I think. So maybe one thing we can do is a very light audit or something, not the full one, since we don't know the full process, but we do know there's certain hardware and software elements, and if the manufacturer can apply and we can do that quick thing, then we can allow the deposits without fully skipping some sort of process.
So along those lines, Jeremy, in this unique scenario, there's almost like a two-layer technology stack that's needed, because really it's only Freedom Fi that has the core layer, for lack of a better term, and then Freedom Fi is enabling manufacturers and the rest of the ecosystem. So, but Freedom Fi is based off the Magma stack, which is open source. So in theory, a new Freedom Fi could come, right? And maybe hopefully they do. So I think maybe we just need on the 5G to be a little bit more specific on, if somebody's coming in, are they a core Magma? Are they proposing they're going to take Magma themselves and start from scratch and deliver? And we could do a preliminary, kind of review audit on, like, are they viable there? And then assuming today you have Freedom Fi, and let's say you get one or two others in the next 6 months. The other folks coming in, are more the secondary, hardware manufacturer, system integrator side of it, where they need to say who they're getting that core software stack from, right? So if they basically say, well, we're not doing it ourselves, we're going to get it from Freedom Fi or from company X, and as long as Freedom Fi or company X is approved and they've also confirmed that this is a licensee, then I think that kind of sets up at least a pre-approval skeleton that we could feel comfortable with. What I'm concerned about is somebody coming in and saying, I'm going to do this without any clarity on, they don't have an agreement with Freedom Fi or somebody else who's approved at that layer. And we need to do a little due diligence there, because it's not trivial for somebody just to say, hey, I'm going to take Magma and go build one of these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Sophie's saying we do have a 5G audit process.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Yeah, there is a 5G audit process that was put together by Boris and Sophie following the 5G AMA that we had for our small tester group of manufacturers. The issue is that there's no proof of coverage for 5G right now. So I don't know if it's something where we want to have that initial audit at least started for manufacturers before we allow them to take deposits? That might be one option that we have.
Right, but right now it's got to be the only real approved path is somebody who's a Freedom Fi partner, licensee, whatever you want to call it. Right.
I mean-
so somebody who comes in needs to we need to be able to verify with Freedom Fi, since they've got that first level approval. Yes, this is a customer we're working with, and we can do kind of the secondary process. But if they're not approved or confirmed by Freedom Fi right now, then they wouldn't pass this preliminary approval. Does that make sense, everybody? And it's not because it's exclusive to Freedom Fi. It's because Freedom Fi is the only person who's come forward with a Magma port that's even viable right now. Right?
So if another manufacturer comes, we are requiring at this time that everybody uses the Magma core. That's
unless somebody can present a viable alternative. Like again, it's kind of like with the security audit. We said like, hey, if you use ECC 608, you're kind of check. You're kind of grant that it's a proven process. It's a known path for approval. Right now, the only known path for approval for 5G is basically Magma through Freedom Fi. If somebody wants to come in with another path, I think we need to give them the opportunity, to present it and possibly approve it. But they have to prove that they can actually do it. Like it's not just like saying I'm going to go do that. It's not easy to go. There's a lot that needs to be done, right? So somebody else could come in, but we need to ask. This needs to be a question on like the application. Like, how are you productizing the 5G stack? Are you starting with the Magma core? Are you a licensee of Freedom Fi who's kind of already they're like the pre-approved? There could be other Freedom Fis that evolve coming forward. I mean, hopefully they do actually, but right now that's really the only one in the ecosystem. Right?
Yeah, so this would be on a case-by-case basis. And so the manufacturer that came forward and is asking if they can take a nominal fee, I believe they suggested, or we suggested in the thread, 1 HNT, to build up a list, for them to build up a list of who they might potentially be selling to, so they can figure out if they're going to have 20 customers or if they're going to have 25 million customers. I think it's fair to say that on a case-by-case basis, we would allow them to take a nominal fee. And that case-by-case basis, to echo what you just said, Brad, would be based on, do they have a path using Magma, because that's a pre-approved path, moving forward. And if we don't know who they are, i.e. they're not a Freedom Fi disciple, then we would have to evaluate them further.
Well, yeah, if it's not already there, I would say on the 5G application form, we need to say, okay, where's your 5G stack coming from, right? So where's the origin, right? Is it Magma or other, right? I think people can say, okay, are you basically, doing all the necessary software integration and productization of the Magma stack, or are you working with a partner? In this case, the one partner that they could say is Freedom Fi. Mm-hmm. Right. And then the kind of the third is just more their general, hey, this is where we are with product development, blah, blah, blah. So, clarity on those first 2 points. And then I think, at least for me, I would want to at least have some level of this committee screening them and giving some pre-approval to say, okay, we either, if you're a Freedom Fi partner or licensee, we think that's a viable path, right? It's obviously getting a lot of support from the community and key technology partners. If you're telling us you're going to do your own Magma port, well, then I think that opens a good conversation to find out who they are and see if we think that they've demonstrated enough progress on that to be considered, to let them open up some kind of pre-sale or reservation system. I think that's where my head's at. But you can't just come in and say, hey, I'm going to go do a 5G product, I'm going to use Magma, and not either prove that you have engineering ability, resources to go do it, or that you've already got some kind of deal going with a partner who can provide that stuff.
Right, that's fair. Do you a question for the group? Do we see this as an addendum to HIP 19, or an addition? Like, are we going to make a new HIP for 5G?
Should be a new HIP.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just when you said that, those questions, I'm like, these can't be. It's going to be very confusing, and it's not really the same. We're not going to have the same issues. Like, we'll be building out a new HIP.
Yeah, I think it's a whole new process and form. Whether if it's a new HIP versus HIP 19, but the for me the application flows and the questions we want to ask are very different because 5G is different.
So it's a different HIP in that case.
Fortunately,
Well, then we have to pass a HIP,
Bravo,
though.
right?
Right, we have to pass a new HIP if it's a different HIP. It's a different application process under HIP 19.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're getting closer. The case by case basis, as we're writing here in the notes, is the thing that I think we owe the community and manufacturers more criteria. Like, what does that mean? It's not going to be purely random. What do you call it? Hidden agenda. Like, we make it clear. Our case by case basis is pretty much checking these boxes. Are you using the Magma Core? Are you read directly through Freedom Fi? Because it's those cases where you don't fit those that we want to be able to tell someone that we deny the ability to take a deposit. It's because, look, you're outside the technical guidelines that we have for the moment. That's the question I really want to get through, which is I'm all for having deposits as long as there's still some audit process, something that
and
we
again,
check and have them affirm.
Ideally, there's choice. There's multiple people that can bring products based on Magma into the market. It's just right now, Freedom Fi is the one who's kind of the pipe cleaner. They've led the charge, and they're the only one that we have any visibility to that's made meaningful progress to say they're close enough where we would consider this. Right? If you are taking your own path, great, but you have to disclose that to the community and to us, and we have to understand enough about what you're doing. You have to demonstrate that you've made enough progress to consider opening up some kind of reservation system, presale, whatever you want to call
I think go ahead, Jamie.
Historically, I think this body hasn't taken the extra step of doing technical diligence or actually testing a unit. I'm wondering if this body will not do that for 5G if we have a reliable third party that could do that, or if we would be at all interested in testing the flow end to end. There's a lot of ways that this can go wrong. Low row packet forwarders are a lot simpler than building a network core that's hosted on an x86 box in the field. So I don't want to over speculate that things will go wrong, but if and when they do, it's very challenging, and consumers, typically aren't as technically aware of what's happening in that box. And if it don't do the thing they bought it to do, it causes a lot of frustration and potential litigation, et cetera. So I wouldn't want the project to be tarnished by that. Just the idea of massive issues in the field. So anyway, just a thought, but it's more of a question than an answer. I'm really curious if the body has any thoughts on who could perform end-to-end tests or some level of certification beyond, yes, you say you're going to implement the Magma Core. So
At this time, I'm going to find the link to our audit process, but it's going to be Freedom Fi that's going to be testing.
excellent.
That will be testing that part of it. We will continue to do the LoRaWAN testing, the mechanical testing, manufacturability testing, and so on, and also do a preliminary test, or not with the post-preliminary, whatever that word is. We will test for Bobcat, for example, went through as a Freedom Fi partner, and we tested that. We additionally tested, redundantly tested that it ran on 5G. So just sending data over the network, but doing our regular audit process. So as far as I know,
Sophie, I didn't know that. I trust them to do the right thing, so that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should illustrate. We do, this body does, through Sophie, test the LoRaWAN gateways. You're aware of that, right, Jameson?
Yeah, I guess there's been so much different performance in the field, so I'm not aware of the rigor. Or
there's a functional test. Like functional test means, hey, it will connect, it will transfer a packet, but that's different from an RF performance test or a field test, which is where I think you're seeing a lot of the differences in units. And then obviously there's firmware that's being upgraded all the time. And, at the moment of test, their firmware could work, but if they're not on top of their firmware upgrades, then some manufacturers have, I think, caused their customers some frustration. So it's impossible for the MOC to test throughout the product lifecycle, or the MCC.
And just to make sure I'm understanding that as kind of a translator to the general public who might watch this. So Jameson, the question you had was who is going to do the actual testing? Because the MCC for the most part doesn't do testing. We just certify that testing has been performed by some approved body. Am I understanding that right?
You're talking about the radio certification process.
Okay.
It sounds like, Nick.
Yep,
But we
I'm just trying to
actually
understand what
do-
Jameson said. I'm a little bit technically backwards.
Yeah, I think we all are kind of dancing around different points of it.
Okay.
We do some amount of testing. We actually get the units in house for LoRaWAN.
Yep.
We get one unit, we take it apart, examine it, make certain that the security chip is there if they're using it. We get into the firmware, look at how it's configured, and we have the KYC process, and then finally we ask them to show us for the governmental body that they sell the hotspots in.
Yep.
That they have passed whatever testing that government requires in that country. But we don't do end-to-end like a LoRaWAN device packet testing or POC testing.
That's more where my curiosity lies, but Sophie and I can connect about it offline.
Yeah, I've also popped the link to the audit process, primarily authored by Boris.
Yeah, I'd be interested in jitter rate, packet loss rate, device throughput, number of current devices supported by an individual cell, roaming capability between small cells to different network cores. There is a certain level of testing that I think is borne by the market, and there's a certain level that's borne by this body, and where that line is, perhaps I need to be more educated. So that could be on me as well.
But so Jameson, just to maybe tie what you're saying to, I think with Sophie, we were talking about earlier. So within under HIP 19, we're going to have a separate 5G application process. And I think as part of that application process, more of these questions about the product's capabilities should be listed out so that the manufacturer can disclose what their product is capable of. Because there may be some, variations, and I think part of, maybe our mission and the whole community's mission is some educational material on, hey, these are the different things around the 5G solutions that, different products may have different capabilities, may perform differently, right? Just because there is an aspect of having to educate the community about CBRS small cells. It's a technology most people are not familiar with.
Very good. And
Yeah.
Sophie and I did an MCC kind of explainer test run last night that we should have out, I don't know, by the end of the weekend. But it might be good to do another one. Come on, Sophie. You got it.
I'm always going to edit this thing. I know, it's a 5-minute video.
Yeah.
By the end of the weekend, though.
But I think, Brad, what you're saying is it's super important. And Jameson, kind of the point here is that we got to make sure that the thousands of people who are going to, and maybe millions, thousands of people are going to deploy these things, have a decent idea of like how it will work and how it's supposed to work and what's on them and what's not. Is that?
Yeah, and what the specs are,
Yeah.
kind of, and again, I think in the consumer space, the thing that's most analogous in some ways is like a Wi-Fi router. So if you go to Best Buy, people are shopping for Wi-Fi routers, and they see different specs on the beginning of the router, and maybe it has antenna diversity or whatever. And there's some level of consumer knowledge of what that means. I think in the case of the Helium products, whether it's LoRa or 5G, like the manufacturers to date haven't done a good job of listing all of the capabilities, the specs, the RF output power, and a lot of them didn't even list their antenna gain and what the antenna specs were, right? So I think this is an area where I don't want to stop short of saying we're gonna require, but we in the application process, at least if we list out a list of like the relative product specs, performance specs, we at least can make sure that the manufacturers are documenting that. It's also a good test to make sure the manufacturers even know enough when they make their application to intelligently fill out all of the lines that we're asking about, right? And they're not just saying, hey, I'm gonna go do a 5G. I mean, that's my biggest fear when we talk about like opening up pre-sales is like somebody come in and say, hey, I'm gonna go do a 5G product, I'm gonna use Magma, and they may not really have the, you know, the depth to execute. And that's the last thing.
I would also say, Jameson, that list that you gave sounded like a pretty good list, and we would welcome, I assume it's going to be Christina ultimately that will be writing it up, but we have a hardware specifications document that I've been taking care of, so we can add all of that stuff there. And yeah, let's connect on this.
So I guess I'm really confused. Why is this a question before the body? If we have a process for approving and auditing 5G hotspots, why can't it go through that rule? You don't take deposits until you're approved. What's the pressing thing that's causing issues? It sounds like there is one.
The MCC can decide to do that. The reason that this was brought to our attention was manufacturers basically wanting to check the market for, you know, is 5G hotspot something that would, you know, I guess like the market conditions for it, which is why the low amount was asked for like a deposit. And I had put in some suggested guidelines, like maybe this is something we only accept from people who have already been through, you know, a full or light hotspot that have been approved and are in like good standing. So that's kind of where it's originated.
I think it's like a wait list with a nominal fee.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is a deposit. We just had to acknowledge that,
yeah.
you know, that is a deposit under our rules for LoRa. I see that helps a little bit. I thought it was because we didn't have a audit process ready and we didn't want to stall people who we thought had a good chance of making it through.
It's coming from Christina. It's coming from a manufacturer question, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I like the idea that if they've demonstrated that they have already made a full or light hotspot that's been approved and are still in good standing, that to me seems to be a pretty safe one until I'm just reading through the criteria here.
Yeah, no, I mean, Sophie, you're the one that's familiar with the 5G audit process. Is there like a step along the way where we can say, hey, after you've completed this step, you can take deposits? Is that reasonable? Or because I'm not familiar with it, so I'm just kind of stabbing in the dark.
I think that from a manufacturer's standpoint, and I'll look to anyone to correct me if I'm wrong here, they would be looking to determine what their supply chain is going to be. So by the time the audit or any hardware arrives by me, it's in the manufacturing process. They've spun their boards, they've ordered a lot of parts, and they're planning.
So this is where like I'm really nervous about just letting somebody come in and say, look, we think we might do a 5G product. We want to open up, you know, prepayments, and the MCC approves it. Like I don't want to approve that. They've got no skin in the game. What if we require? How do you determine who? It becomes totally subjective for us to say, well, we think you're good guys, and you know we're not sure about you. Like they've got to prove that they're actually done a reasonable amount of product development work, you know, that they've invested something, you know, to really go be serious about this. And this comes back, you know, to again, like at least documenting, you know, product and having clarity on what you're going to do and how you're going to, I don't know. That's where I am. I'm very concerned about letting this be open, because every HIP 19 approved manufacturer will go take deposits, right? If we don't put some barrier, and most of them haven't done any work on this, and they probably haven't really looked into it deep enough to understand what they're getting into. Here's
an idea. Right now for the LoRaWAN hotspots, we don't accept prototypes. So in fact, there's been some back and forth. I mean, just so that you know the public understands, we reject even cases that appear to be CNC milled. There's been many a time that I've had a manufacturer send me after the fact their final casing. So that's just for the public. So perhaps we allow for 5G prototype versions for audit, for a preliminary audit.
A pre-audit.
A pre-audit.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
And then if they get through that and the firmware works and everything works, they are not investing a ton of money. I mean, I don't want to get anything on a breadboard, obviously, but
Wire wrapped too. That'd be.
I mean,
yeah, that
compromise, right? They would prove that they built something. They would not be taking too much risk. Right now we're speccing still about 7 weeks for audit, but I think things have slowed down enough where it probably wouldn't be that long of a turnaround time.
the devil's advocate side. Are we here to help ensure manufacturers are good business decision makers? In other words, why do they need our help to take risks? Are we afraid that if we don't allow deposits, no one's going to take the risk to manufacture a 5G hotspot, and there will just simply not be Helium 5G, and some competitor network will take over? Because these are business people. That's kind of their job to ascertain whether there's a market or not, and they may not need our help to do that.
But in typical business stuff, it's totally acceptable to do pre-orders, right? Like I'm gonna, for Gristle King, I'm doing a pre-order for whatever, for t-shirts is what I did, right? It's like, hey, you know, buy your t-shirts now, you get them early before I put the order in, you get a deal. I think the thing that when I hear that, Jeremy, I think it's a super good point, but at the same time, we got to be careful about saying, like, we want to allow manufacturers to conduct standard business practices and not penalize them for that. And I think that's why we're discussing.
But the difference to your example is, in your case of pre-selling a t-shirt, it was your company, your brand. You weren't grabbing on Helium's coattails to generate a bunch of revenue for your business, which is unfortunately what maybe was trying to transpire. So it's a little bit different scenario, and same thing. Like if you took any major brand or even any industry, copyrighted, logo, and you went and tried to go pre-sell on it, they wouldn't let you. So this is why the committee's here. It is a different scenario than just a company saying, hey, I'm going to pre-sell a product for a new whatever, rototiller or whatever, you pick whatever the product is, right? So, and this is why we're having this discussion, right? But I think it's a balancing act of wanting to encourage people to enter the market and have multiple choice, on the 5G side, but also not letting people just take money piggybacking on the Helium brand in pre-sale. Like, give me an HNT, I might do a 5G product. Like, oh yeah, great. I think that Sophie, I could live with your compromise. Like you have to submit a somewhat of a working prototype, fill out your application on 5G that looks like it's plausible that you've got a plan, right? Either it's direct or, like I said, you can work with partners. We're fine. And before you can take any kind of pre-sale, right? I think that's a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, I'm for that as well. Relaxing the prototype requirement up for 5G so that it does come through our hands. We get to look at it. You really show that you have made some commitment to actually making the unit, and you answer all these questions. And only after then you are permitted to take deposits. We'd still have to go through, like, how big of a deposit can it be? Is it the one HNT or not? But
yeah,
we have to decide that now.
I think it needs to be a modest deposit. I think the way Freedom Fi did it was better than some of the other things where people took full prepayment, right? And that created a bunch of other issues for them. So, but yeah, I think we can cross that bridge, maybe a little bit later, or exactly what your prepayment could be if you make it through the pre-audit, right? So.
Yeah, I think it's also good to make that payment in AT&T.
Why should we dictate that, though?
No, I think we should totally allow them to do whatever they want. Like that's business. They should be allowed to conduct their business however they want, as long as it doesn't negatively affect the Helium network, right? I mean, I'm certainly an HMD Helium maximalist, but that doesn't mean everyone should have to be. And if we think about this stepping way back out, if someone wants to contribute to the network because it will build their business, like we shouldn't make them, I don't know, pay in some certain currency.
Well, but there's also more consumer protection if people are allowed to pay in credit card or something, right? There's no consumer protection so I mean, I'm not saying we force a hard rule, but I don't know that we, either way, I don't, we can, I think this question is, do we allow the manufacturer to take some form of reservation deposit or not after they show a working prototype? I think it seems like that's plausible.
Maybe,
I think it needs to be a small, it needs to be kept small, whatever that may be, $99 or less or something like that.
I'm actually curious what John and Patrick think, because I haven't heard anything out of those guys. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. But what about requiring some kind of warning if they take the pre-sale piece? Like if they're allowed to launch a pre-sale, it's like, hey, you have to have this warning with these words. It says this, it's this size, whatever it is. It says this is whatever, the high risk activity or blah, blah, blah. You may or may not get your thing, so that we're doing a decent job of protecting both the manufacturer and the customer side. But I'm John and Patrick. Let me hear what you guys have got to say.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides of the coin, right? We're trying to both protect the consumer, the customer that puts their money on the table and runs a risk of, hey, these guys might never be able to deliver a working product, and then at the same time, we're trying to get manufacturers to actually step up to the plate and build a helium compliant product so that we can extend the network, right? So it's sort of a balancing act. And, I think it's difficult to decide, what we are going to allow. Do we limit the number of pre-sale orders? Because, obviously the whole reason for taking pre-sale orders is so that the manufacturer gets some upfront cash so they can fund their development, which
maybe not, Pat. So that is one potential, but ideally the manufacturer has their own financing to actually fund their supply chain. The other argument for doing this is so they can understand what the customer demand is. Which
yes,
is separate.
You're right. That's true.
So I think this comes down to if you limit the amount of money that you can take for a pre-sale, it really forces that manufacturer to be able to finance their own supply chain, which I think is preferred, versus using customers' money to build a product for the first time, which is very risky.
Yes, and of course, the smaller the manufacturer is, the more reliant they're going to be on this pre-sale money, or theoretically, right?
It's a fact.
And they're almost two different tools for different jobs. The expression of interest and a token payment is to gauge how many 100,000 potential purchases there will be. But if that isn't a significant amount, that's not a very good gauge. And after that point, the success of that gauge is going to be the time to market. So if it takes them a further 12 months to bring the product forward, they could have lost that market because 10 other manufacturers have come through in the meantime. So that's probably, to me, it seems less significant and less important to the process than potentially a manufacturer gathering a deposit to actually make something meaningful towards the purchase.
Yeah, no easy dollar sign or universal currency amount that we can put quickly on the table.
Okay, well, nothing there.
Fun times. Well, let's reiterate what I think the consensus that we've agreed on, right? We're tentatively okay with it, minus figuring out what the dollar amount is. If they go through this process, and we're still going to have essentially an audit, and the only sticking point is, what is the limit of that deposit? Is that generally what we're at?
I don't know. Make it $100 a unit. I don't know.
Well, okay.
another-
I was asking yes or no question. And you came up with a number.
Sorry.
Does this expression of interest, the sort of not deposit, but the sort of one HNT type amount, does that have to be held by the manufacturer?
Yes, because the MCC doesn't we don't deal with any sort of customer service issues.
Yeah, the manufacturer could have it in an escrow if they wanted to, but we haven't seen that today.
Which would be lovely.
I'll just say the precedent that was set for Freedom Fi was $99. So, since these are all kind of people following in that footsteps, then that's a consistent number. It was exactly what was already kind of, structured to enable this market. It seems like a balance point. This is expensive equipment, right? It's not like this is a low cost piece of hardware to begin with. So.
But also from a consumer point of view, people are less likely to wave goodbye to $99 versus one HNT.
Right. Well, it could be, and maybe they can do it in HNT, or I'm not saying it has to be fiat. It doesn't have to be $99. I'm just saying that the value of the deposit at that day, right, needs to be, $99 or less, which is consistent to what was already approved. And, at least we're really not changing. We're just basically extending kind of that path to new people who want to come in.
I think what John was indicating is that the refund, all prepayments or down payments need to be fully refundable until the time at which.
I
which is
think
already,
they can be refundable and refundable in the way that you made them, right? That would be part of the requirement for the manufacturer. It was like, if you pay an HNT, you pay it back, however they want to do this.
So slightly, I mean, at the risk of kind of going way off topic, there's like a business opportunity for someone to run a Helium escrow. And that might be something that would be really good for this body and for everyone is some trusted escrow company where you say, like,
yes,
you put
almost
in
like
1,000.
a smart contract that could run on a chain somewhere.
It's so crazy.
It could lock up funds and then upon delivery of the asset, make them clear. But that would be very innovative.
I mean, someone can even do that in a different token, right, and make it a real smart contract, right, and do this for the community. I mean, I think there's this is like Kickstarter. This is kind of a Kickstarter, alternative, right? That could be very broad. So I think it's a great business idea. The MCC is not going to run it.
No.
Yeah, I'm all for the deposit being whatever currency, but having a limit pegged to, let's say, USD, and because I don't want to force it to be in a token. I really do want there to be opportunity for people to use as many different varieties of payments as possible, including ones that make the consumer feel more happy, like a credit card. I don't want to eliminate that possibility. In fact, I want to encourage it.
But they're different tools, aren't they? There's the expression of interest towards a manufacturer for them to progress their business plans. And there's a deposit, which is more meaningful, and commitment on the part of the consumer for that then to go into production, and they know how many pre-orders there are. So they're different tools for different jobs in this, aren't they?
They are, but we're only specifically talking about deposit for serious interest, using deposit as a gauge for serious interest, right? Because if they want to have a wait list, it doesn't require deposits. That's already permitted under the rules.
Is there any expectation that after a manufacturer takes a deposit of the delivery timeline from that?
I don't see it in the proposal.
This is also something that the MCC doesn't handle. We do require that manufacturers in their HIP 19 proposal that they have a support plan. So that is one of the things that the MCC will look at initially, like when Christina first brings the manufacturer to us. We're looking to see that they have a support plan, among other things.
And John, that's not to say that we're like constrained and some other body is telling us we can't do that. That's how we have generally approached this over the year now that we've been in operation. A little bit more, holy moly. Happy birthday, MCC.
It's been a year.
So it's been more than a year, I think. April last year, I think. Separate topic. So again, I'm just like, when we tell you, oh, that's not what we do. It's not historically what we've done. And we've looked at, how deep do we get into the consumer protection things and putting in standards and what would it look like? And that's why we've stepped away from some of those things because we felt it would be very hard to manage. But just as we tell you why that is, it is something we could all vote to change.
Right.
I'm open to that, but historically, we've stepped away from that.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay, so should we jump into, Jeremy, you want to jump into your vendor lockup?
Yeah, we're basically sort of in consensus that we're okay with this deposit going forward. We just need to lock down the maximum amount that can be deposited.
What I did is I put in the decisions that it's going to be discussed more on Discord, and we'll create like a checklist and all
Great.
the requirements to.
Perfect. Thanks, Priscilla. All right, so I'll go into the HIP XX to be named, but it will be HIP vendor token lockup. So just a background on what that is. We have the opportunity to try to help avoid manufacturers who want to simply game the system by taking their powers to onboard hotspots, but deploy them in a way that's not actually providing coverage. And the way we approach that, of course, is through our trial mechanism, which actually comes from this HIP, from this proposal, which we did use with Deeper. And we revoke their ability to onboard further hotspots. It would be nice to have some other mechanism on the front side of this, requiring them to perhaps put a deposit up for every hotspot they onboard onto the chain in HNT, and in a way that this body could burn or destroy those tokens on evidence of misbehavior. Again, this would be an economic incentive from them to that has real power, that would make it possible for us to really punish a manufacturer in a way that wouldn't require necessarily revoking their key. You know, they would see this as a possibility and something you can't escape from. Whereas once you've onboarded hotspots, we can't take them off the chain, right? And so sometimes if you have the manufacturer manages to make 1 million units, they're all deployed horribly, we revoke their key, they may have actually succeeded in their model there. So this is to help prevent that. So the plan here is committing ourselves to polishing this enough to submit it by the end of the week to be an official hit for the community to look at it and vote on. So we really do need everyone, whether you hate it or not, to at least take a look at the parts of it that you're concerned with and make, this is your final time to take any edits to it. Of course, once it becomes a HIP, there's also an edit process after that. But I've been sitting on it, dreading it forever, purely because I don't know exactly how many tokens to put in there. I think that's something that the community, we together can go over. So that's the plan, at least for me, and Sophie, who helped write it, significant portions of it. Any thoughts on this, like out loud, before I force you to go actually interact with the document?
I think we should do it. It's like it's good as is. Push it out. Put it out. I mean, on the HIP side, like put it out to the community to vote and comment on and do the rest of it. But it seems like we've done.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
There are some sticky parts in there, like how we don't have an escrow account, and this sort of does ask for there to be something like an escrow that this body would control, or some other entity that holds these tokens, and when receiving a vote from us, they will take action with it, either refunding portions of it according to the scheme, or burning, slashing it outright. That's the part we don't really have. So.
And that would be a wallet held by probably the foundation board.
Sure, if they're willing to do that, we'd have to ask them. They might say, look, we're not going to do that. So we may have to go back to the drawing board.
I think, you primarily authored it. I went through it with you. Nick contributed to it. Phoenix, Felipe, who's not here, contributed to it. If anyone else wants to do some stuff in the next 10 minutes here, but then I think we should put it up and move forward. Because we don't know what the reaction is going to be. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think I made a comment in Discord. So in principle, I'm for it. I'm curious, instead of just letting this HNT sit in an escrow wallet, why can't we let the manufacturer put it in a validator so that they actually earn a return on it. So we can ask one of the commercial validator guys to basically run this on behalf of the, this pool, which is tied to these deposits made by manufacturers. It gives the manufacturer a return on this capital that's being held, by this entity.
I guess my argument would be that their return on the capital is the ability to sell hotspots, and this is a counterweight to that. If we make this some earning potential for them, it actually deflates their commitment rather than making it a specific commitment.
I disagree because the earning the HNT yield, in my opinion, is the incentive back to the manufacturer to keep doing firmware updates and keeping their products and their fleet running very smoothly. So they still don't have access. They still don't have access to the funds. The funds are at risk. They're out of their control for a period of time, but at least their capital is earning some return. And in theory, I think we can structure it in a way where they actually can get the interest part of it maybe returned back to them over the long periods of time, which is an incentive to keep their firmware updated.
So there's a section of the HIP called Standards for Justice, Standards of Justice. It's essentially what's an actionable item. Firmware and support are not in there currently.
No, I'm not saying that it's not an actionable. It's a different plane completely. I'm saying that there's really no difference in terms of the customer is going to put up some amount of HNT, or the manufacturer, and it's going to be held. It's either going to be held in a place that earns no yield, or it could be held in a place that earns a yield, right? And because this is held as, this is not our asset, it's still the manufacturer's asset. At some point, they should be able to get it back. Why shouldn't they be able to get it back with a yield? I mean, a lot of escrow accounts, some escrow accounts can earn interest, some don't for accounting purposes. But it just seems like a natural place for where this HNT goes, and then the manufacturer does earn a yield on their capital. To me, it seems like there's nothing, doesn't change any of the incentive side of what you've proposed, Jeremy. It just allows the good players, right, who are really carrying this for the long term. They've got some capital that is not dead. It's earning a yield. It's supporting the community. And again, it's a long-term incentive to continue to keep your firmware going and things like that. It's not the primary reason we're doing this, but it gives them a long-term state that is earning a yield.
I like it.
I just don't think it's an incentive for them to keep their firm. They could completely stop making their units and stop shipping firmware updates and still get their refund back under the current.
I'm not, but in theory, the amount of HNT that they're going to have in this escrow is going to increase because they're going to get more and more units over time, right? So eventually, this becomes a reasonably large sum of capital that they're investing, and every company wants to get a return on their capital. They just don't want it to sit dead. Right, so it continues them to incentivize them as being a long-term participation in the Helium community. I agree. It's not in the direct line of sight, but it's this kind of tangential benefit of letting you put it in a validator pool versus just sitting in a dead wallet. And there's infrastructure. We can go to one of the guys running one of the validators.
Correct.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's why I would consider that.
There's some slight technical things in there. Under the HIP, the funds are returned in tranches on a monthly basis. It's a rolling sort of window. And of course, if the HNT is staked up in a validator, it's locked up for 5 months after the point in which it's unstaked. So it stays locked up all the time it's in a validator. And as soon as you decide to unstake it, you have to wait an additional 5 months. Of course, it's 5 months in blocks. It's blocks, not clocks, before any of that funds can be transferred out. So that might be a sticking point, but I'm fine.
Maybe the manufacturer choice. Like here's 2 paths for this money, right? You have to, if you just want to put it in the wallet escrow account, no yield, you can. If you want to, we'll work with, hopefully somebody's running a validator that allows you to put it there and you get yield. Ideally, you want these guys to keep it in HNT, right, to help continue to grow the network and the strength of the token.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you want to add that section to the HIP, I think we're all tacitly aligned with it. But you got to write it out. It's got to look nice and technical, or yeah, actually, let's say it's got to look explainable and doable. I worry about the schemes that make it really hard for us to actually enact this. So. Okay, well, thanks for the support on that. Again, it's really sort of on me to push it out. So we'll put it in the channel, our channel, again, where the Notion doc is, so you can edit it. But I think deadline, Pacific time, evening, Friday, it's going over to Jamie to say, hey, Jamie, can you publish this a HIP? Okay, cool. I'm rolling along. Oh boy. We've got 20 minutes left. I know we were supposed to have a short meeting. Is anybody have to go for we're overlapping with the light hotspot.
I have a 1 o'clock conflict, so I'm going to have to drop in 5.
Does that mean 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Don't know your time zone. Okay, now I do.
Yep, same here.
So I think this next one is kind of, Brad, it's in your wheelhouse. It's framework for manufacturers with commercial deployment plans. You know, sort of, right? How do we deal with manufacturers who are really not going to sell to consumers? Are we okay with that? What powers would we like to use to get control of that so it doesn't become a fiasco? As an example, you know, we've often talked about if there's an original equipment manufacturer, I often get OEM reversed, but let's say there's a manufacturer who actually is technically in charge of the hotspot, does all the firmware, does the design, does the radio design, all of that, but then makes a contract to sell thousands of units to a customer who's a commercial entity, who is not going to put them in homes, but rather going to put them in factories or put them on, you know, real estate plots. Should we perhaps have that large customer get their own staking key so that we can track their onboarding, and that way manufacturers can do what they do, but they're less burdened that a bad deployment or cheating is going to come back to the original manufacturer because we can shut off the customer's ability to onboard. I think that's generally the proposal we've talked about. Other ideas
I mean,
what we wanted?
My opinion is that, you know, as long as it's not administratively burdenful to us, having large deployers, whoever they are, encourage them to get their own maker key. It makes it much easier to track their deployments. I mean, it becomes very easy versus, you know, and even if they buy product across multiple manufacturers over time, you can still kind of see who's the owner of a large fleet out there and behaving. So I think that makes sense to me. And so for some of the manufacturers who are already approved, who may be working with large volume customers, maybe that manufacturer would tell their customer and come to us and say, look, we would prefer this customer have their own maker key. So that way, you know, their fleet is kind of visible. And actually that large customer then takes this responsibility of the token lock. So the manufacturer doesn't necessarily risk their reputation or their maker key on a very large customer that they may not really know that well. So, you know, I think I'm fine with that. And the only thing is the hardware doesn't have to go through a full re-audit. If it's already been approved, it's really just like, okay, we know the hardware, it's all good. It goes through the flow just to make sure the new maker key is being assigned properly. But, you know, it's kind of like we don't have to revisit that part of the deal, right? But I think this is a real scenario. I mean, it's happening today with no visibility. I think all this does is allow really the manufacturers to realize that they have a very high volume customer that they don't know very well, that this is probably what they want to have happen versus them taking this risk for the high volume customer.
Yeah, I'm liking that idea, and that, you know, we're still retaining control of the original equipment manufacturer, making certain that it is a legitimate, functional hotspot that does have the security mechanism in it. And then we're just saying that the final responsibility of who owns it and who's really at stake when the hotspot gets onboarded is this larger customer. we want to put some technical requirements in there. Every time we add a staking key to the chain, it does inflate a variable called the staking keys chain variable, which essentially is the ledger. So I don't see any huge problems with adding about 40 bytes for every key. And because it's a ledger, it's not multiplied in every block. The block in which we add it, of course, adds it. And then every validator at this point, every chain follower is going to need to store that on disk somewhere. So I don't want to see these in the millions, but we could potentially, I could see they have 1,000 different staking keys, and that'll probably be okay. Well, okay, so tacitly, anybody completely puzzled by what we're talking about? I think everyone's kind of understanding it. So I don't know. Is there a deadline for when we really want to get this done? Or we continue to sort of say, yeah, it sounds like a cool idea, but nothing
Is there
happens?
a manufacturer right now that's saying, hey, I'm waiting on you guys to make this decision?
We're not specifically waiting on, or there's nobody waiting on us, but I do think that this is something that should be kind of outlined, and we can adjust as needed, but I do think there needs to be some sort of baseline. We do have somebody who put in a HIP-19 that is somebody who's going to be like, they're selling specifically to a business that wants to deploy these at different places that are run by that business. So I think that having some sort of baseline is really helpful, at least like moving forward, and adjusting as needed if we see something that, changes.
Yeah, and also just in a way for the manufacturer and their large customer to understand that they are both in a way responsible. So that the manufacturer, I'm thinking we just had someone come through that's doing that, who sold to a larger customer, and hopefully that customer understands. I mean, they may not realize that they're responsible.
Well, I think, two things. One is, I think we talked about this before, and maybe this is something we just confirmed with everybody today. There's nothing, if a new HIP-19 applicant came in for whatever, whoever they are, what do they want to do? There's not a requirement for them to actually sell that product retail. So like somebody can go build their own, as long as they follow all the requirements today, they can come through the process and ultimately get approved. There's no rule against that, right? If you want to go build gateways and deploy them yourself and you meet all the requirements, you can go do that. So first, does everybody agreed on that? Does that need to be revisited?
No,
there is a slight thing is that, we do have this pseudo KYC process where we look at someone and say, we kind of try to gauge how they're going to deploy. And if we see it's going to be like just a one customer and we don't see any retail activity, we have started to get fishy about that.
But is it retail activity? Is retail activity the measurement, or is it the KYC of the customer not really being clear about what their deployment strategy is? So I come back to, like, if somebody just says out of the blue, I want to build 100,000, and they don't provide any clarity or connections to, say, a legitimate deployment scenario, and they kind of come and they're wrapped in secrecy, versus a company that comes in and says, look, I own oil platforms around the world. I really want to put these on all the oil platforms, but I'm not going to sell them. Like, so for me, I think it's a different thing. Like, if you make an application and you're telling us you're not going to sell it retail and make it available to everybody, then you have to tell us what you're going to, give us some credible connection on how you're going to deploy it, why it makes sense, how it's going to legitimately expand the network. So that's where I'm kind of at. I don't know if everybody else is kind of.
Yeah, I think I'm just mirroring what you're saying.
Is it something where we want to have just an additional question? Because right now in the KYC diligence form that we have, we do ask them what their percentage of retail versus businesses or large partners would be. I can just add a secondary question that just says, if you're not planning to sell to retail, what is your strategy? And that kind of could give the MCC some more, I guess, visuals on what they're planning to do, just for better clarity.
Right. So to that extent, we don't have to do anything. I don't know we have to change anything. We're just clarifying, a little bit of the process and flow. The other part of it would be maybe just to notify existing HIP-19 manufacturers, hey, if you have a large volume business customer that's coming to you, we would consider giving that customer their own maker key, so that all of that customer's fleet can be managed, and it's really a risk off for the manufacturer that those units are going to be deployed properly, and the manufacturer could even again make their end customer come up with the HNT for the lockup that we're talking about, instead of them having to take it out of their general.
Does this?
So again, I think it's a little bit case by case. Like, we don't want to do this for somebody who's deploying 500 units, but if a maker comes to us that's approved and says, hey, I have somebody who wants to deploy 50,000 or 100,000 units, then probably makes sense.
But for example, in the case that we just saw, where we suspended the maker, they sent all of their units to one partner. How is that different? How are we gonna?
Well, so if you look at a couple of the situations we've had, where we had a maker who kind of said, hey, I didn't know what was happening. Like, it was my partner that did it, not me. Well, this would allow the maker to basically have been able to come to us early and say, look, hey, I have this partner who wants to deploy 10,000 or whatever, 100,000. I really want them to have their own maker key, because I want to sell them the product, but I don't really know where they're going to deploy it to. Right? It gives us visibility into the person who's actually deploying the fleet.
So let's go forward. Let's under this proposed scenario, then we would have revoked that large partner's ability to onboard, and this maker would still be able to onboard. Would we feel comfortable with that outcome, or was this the case where really we thought, hey, the maker being so derelict in their duty, even if we had the ability just to suspend the partner, would we also have suspended the maker as well? I think that's what Sophie's trying to say. Is how does this change that scenario?
Well, I think you'd look at both. I think there's two potential decisions that could be made based on the evidence of the gaming that was presented. It's yes, the maker was still complicit, so we take away both keys. Or in this case, no, the maker was was unaware. I mean, take a large maker like Rack or Bobcat or somebody like that. It's inevitable that somebody is going to deploy with those units. There's too many in the market. So right. How, and in that case, you would maybe be able to see that, yeah, the maker really was not aware, right? The units were bought on the secondary market, whatever it may be. But so I don't think it changes anything. It gives us two levers, right? We can choose to take away the deployer's key, right? The end customer's key, or we can choose to take away both, because it's still clear that the maker wasn't, in the case that the maker's original wallet, all the stuff that we've found before was still there, you take away both, right?
Yep.
All right, so it sounds like we're generally in agreement with this, and I think it really is the only time it comes into action if somebody asks for it, if a maker asks for it. So what we really just have to do is say, hey, here's a consideration we're thinking about, and send this out to all makers. And then if they want to, they have to apply for it.
Or we suggest it. I mean, we're talking to an enterprise maker currently who plans to deliver 200,000, I think, to one enterprise customer. They may not know what that customer is doing or that this exists. For that particular case, I think we would suggest that that's an option.
Yeah, we want to set the numbers.
Yeah, maybe we want to say it's more than, I don't know, more than 50,000, more than some number of units, which actually I don't have a sense of what that might be. So looking to those of you who do, to throw out a number. 200,000 though feels like a lot.
Yeah, I think that and Jeremy, this comes like, how much overhead is there to do this? And what I'm thinking it's over 10,000.
That's my gut feeling too.
Yeah.
But I think we can meet and kind of debate over that in the interest of wrapping up here.
Yeah, and I apologize because I'm really late.
Yeah, you were supposed to go 7-8 minutes ago. Thanks, Brad. All right. Should I be like Jamie and say, now's the time where everybody unmutes and waves at the camera? No.
I just have one thing I want to add in there, because Patrick had asked, just a quick light hotspot update. I know that there's been several applications that have come through. Currently, where those stand is we do have several that already went through like a preliminary audit through Sophie that were approved, and they're working on their radio certifications and onboarding. There's currently kind of a little bit of a lull because they can't actually do the onboard testing until that like firmware is ready for the light hotspots. So we're still probably a little ways away from that. The light hotspot AMA may have some answers also for that question that's currently going on. But I've only actually received radio certifications from maybe a handful of them. So they're still also waiting on that.
All right, so but we can't vote on anything until they actually get the latest and greatest light firmware updates.
That's the process that we outlined, is that they would have to, they could go through the audit preliminarily to make sure the hardware and everything was good, but we couldn't actually like finally approve them for the hardware audit until they could prove that the firmware was updated.
Okay.
But the purpose, just to tag on to Christina, the purpose of the hardware audit, and this is explained to each and every manufacturer, when they get through this preliminary audit, they should be able to order all of their components. I mean, that's the purpose of doing this early. And I think
because I think we're almost at 20 manufacturers who've had their hardware approved. Maybe it's like 16, but
I think, yeah, 20, yeah. Yeah, so they are free to work. Like they can order parts, they can manufacture. They've been preliminary passed in good faith that they will get an MCC approval. No red flags, in other words.
Okay.
Cool. We ready to wave at the camera?
Yeah, now we can do that. Now we're good.
All right, guys.
Right.
I'll see
Thanks,
you guys
everyone.
later.
And thanks,
Rock
John,
on.
for your first meeting. We'll see you.
thanks
ya.
everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.